Now, another fascinating panel with more impactful experts. And the panel is called From Preparedness to Recovery, the Role of Corporate Charity Partnerships in Disaster Response. Led by leader of RELX Cares, a global program supporting employee volunteering and giving that makes a positive impact in the world. Please welcome Global Community Manager from RELX, Alexis Steadman. Hello, Alexis. How are you
Hi,
today?
Esther. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Oh, look, we've got colours that match. That's good. Fantastic. Wow, what a day today. And you've got a really exciting panel coming up, haven't you?
We have. It's going to be a really interesting discussion, following on from so many already interesting discussions. So hopefully we'll be able to add something great to the discussion as well.
Fantastic. Over to you. Take it away, introduce your panel, and I'll see you in a bit.
Thanks, Esther. So it's great to be here today. As Esther said, I'm the global lead for RELX Cares, which is our company-wide giving and volunteering programme. And as part of this role, I lead our philanthropic response to disasters and emergencies. I'm really delighted to be here today to moderate this panel. It's going to be a discussion about the role of corporate charity partnerships in disaster response and the changing nature of that landscape. In recent years, we've witnessed an increase in the frequency and intensity of natural disasters and humanitarian crises around the world. And these events not only challenge the resilience of affected communities, but they also test the capacity of organisations and governments to respond effectively and further hinders our ability to achieve those SDGs. So just as we were hearing in the last panel, in this context too, corporate charity partnerships have emerged as a vital component of disaster response strategies. And by leveraging the resources and the expertise and the networks of both these sectors, these partnerships can really enhance preparedness, facilitate rapid response, and support long-term recovery efforts. And today we're going to explore more further how these collaborations are formed, the challenges they face, and the innovative solutions that they bring to the table. So as you can see, we have three expert panelists who have joined us today, each bringing a wealth of knowledge and experience. Thank you all so much for being here. And I'm going to introduce them one by one and then invite them to talk a little bit about their work and their organisation and just a few opening thoughts about the current landscape with regards to disasters and emergencies and changes since the SDGs were adopted in 2015. So Emma, I will start with you. Welcome, Emma Cherniavsky, the founding CEO for the UK for UNHCR, who the UN Refugee Agency's national partner for the United Kingdom. Emma, thank you for opening our discussion today. I'll hand over to you for a couple of opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. And thank you. It's great to be part of such an esteemed panel. So UK for UNHCR is the national charity partner for the UN Refugee Agency. We were founded about 5 years ago. And our mission is to mobilize private sector partners and supporters across the UK who want to be part of global solutions and supporting refugees around the world. And I think we're functioning now at a time where the number of forcibly displaced people around the world has massively increased. So in the last 10 years, that number has now doubled to about 122 million. And that includes refugees, internally displaced people, asylum seekers, and stateless people. And that's really primarily been driven by conflict and the increase in conflict that we have seen, but also by climate change. And I want to say a little bit more about that. About 75% of people who are forced to flee and are living in other countries now are living in countries that are at high or extreme risk of adverse weather events. And that means that focusing on climate resilience and looking at new models where we can partner with the private sector to deliver preparedness, to deliver adaptation, to deliver climate resilience. That's an increasing focus for UNHCR as we face this world where climate change is becoming more and more disastrous. Refugees often lack critical resources like housing, financial security, jobs, access to services. And so when they're impacted by climate events, they have very little resilience and often are either forced into greater economic insecurity or forced to move again, to be displaced again a second time or a third time. And so I look forward to an interesting discussion today and thinking perhaps focusing on that climate piece and how we can work with private partners and the models that we have seen work, collaborations with the private sector.
Thank you, Emma. Next, I'll move over to you, Clodagh Connolly, the Global Director for Business for Societal Impact, P4SI. You're the global standard in measuring and managing corporate social impact. And Clodagh, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your work, and also you support practitioners in this field and just the current backdrop that you see that they're operating under in regards to the disasters and emergency response.
Absolutely, Alexis, and thank you to my co-panelists and also the esteemed other speakers throughout the day who have been second to none. I don't think I've ever been at an event that had Ban Ki-moon, Lenny Henry and Sarah Duchess of York, so thank you for the invite. And congratulations, RELX. Awesome day, really awesome. So as you said, I'm Clodagh Connolly, and as Global Director for B4SI, we work with 170 leading companies across 30 sectors and 40 countries. And we help them turn community investment from a philanthropic obligation into a strategic core business strength. I also serve as a council member for the Task Force on Inequality and Social Related Financial Disclosures. And we're a commissioner organisation with the Business Commission to Tackle Inequality, led by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And Alexis, you asked me about what we've seen. Well, B4SI has been around for about 30 years. And over the last 3 decades, what we've witnessed is a fundamental shift in how companies give. And Emma was just speaking about corporate partnerships, and I know Margaret will go on to speak more about that and their own experiences. And what we've seen in terms of a shift, not just from, because we've been around pre-SDG, so not just in relation to that last period of time, but initially giving was mostly ad hoc and reactive. So it was writing checks in times of crisis. And I think today our benchmarking data shows that over 75% of our companies, and collectively they give 3 billion annually, they now embed disaster responses within broader ESG and risk strategies. And over half of those have structured frameworks in place for long-term preparedness, for resilience and for recovery support. Some of our members, including RELX, are examples of this shift. So moving from that one-off donation to multi-year partnerships that fund community-led disaster resilience and recovery efforts. And I'll speak about this a little bit more in depth later, but the evolution reflects a much more mature, intentional model of corporate giving, where preparedness and impact are valued just as much as generosity.
Thank you. And yeah, we keep hearing the word preparedness, and we're definitely going to come back to that later. So thank you for those opening remarks. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Margaret Osborne, the Interim Executive Director of the Private Sector Humanitarian Alliance, PSHA, who is serving as a primary coordination body, integrating private sector resources, expertise and technology into the whole ecosystem of international humanitarian response. Margaret, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your role and your work and some opening remarks from you.
Thanks, Alexis, and thank you very much for the opportunity to join Clodagh, Emma, and yourself on this great day. To pick up on what Clodagh was saying on how the corporate philanthropy has really evolved, PSHA is about enabling that involvement. We are a platform that mobilizes the private sector to engage with humanitarian actors to respond and to build resilience. Our goal is to shift the narrative, similar to what Clodagh had mentioned, from ad hoc donations to strategic sustained partnerships that meet the real needs of crisis-affected communities. How do we do that? Through an AI-led digital platform that gives real-time needs on the ground so that corporate actors can see what those needs are to respond. Now, this is a very forward-thinking platform and a way to approach humanitarian action. And you asked at the beginning to talk about the changes in the approach to the SDGs from 2015 and now. To say that the landscape has changed since 2015 is an understatement. It's changed since January this year dramatically. As governments shift their priorities away from humanitarian or development assistance, they're looking to corporates more to not just fill the funding gap, but to also engage more on the humanitarian response. And that comes at a time when global conditions are challenging. The humanitarian system is stretched and being tested in a way it hasn't been tested ever. Corporates are being attacked and having their own bottom lines that they have to respond to. And so there's this kind of difficult and challenging environment to build public-private partnerships. And we really need to work on creating frameworks that will enable that. For those of you who joined Sir Lenny Henry's keynote, he talked about comedy as a sword for good. And PSHA is about creating a tool that can help companies be a sword for good, similar to comedy. And that happens not just through monetary philanthropy. That's one way that private sectors can engage, but there's so much more. Companies can offer expertise, skills, know-how. They can streamline coordination and efficiency. And now's the time to really bring in corporate actors and rebuild the humanitarian system in a way that's inclusive and involves not just the private sector, but the global South. And I'm really excited to be here today and joining Clodagh and Emma on your panel. Alexis, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all for those really inspiring, interesting opening words. So much to kind of delve into. So coming back to you, Emma, we talked about the need for preparedness. This is something that I think organizations like yourselves have been, at the forefront of. It's certainly a kind of buzzword within the corporate strategy giving world. In practical terms, what does effective disaster preparedness look like on the ground? And if you can share any kind of case studies of, partnerships that you've seen that really bring this to life, and if it's relevant, if you can follow up on any local knowledge in effective. How important local knowledge is in this area, that would be great as well. Thank you.
So very much to echo what the panelists have said about this being an unprecedented time in the humanitarian sector where we have to look for new models. And I think the work of UNHCR thinking about displaced people in emergencies and longer term broadly focuses on emergency response, protection, which is helping provide legal advice and documents and protecting the rights of refugees in their host countries, and then long-term solutions. And so when we look at disaster preparedness, there's both a short-term element, and that's the first case study that I wanted to mention, is in the recent earthquake emergency that occurred in Myanmar a couple of months ago. We worked hand in glove with a global UNHCR partner who was on standby to provide air charter so that we could, from our global stockpiles, be able to deliver those core relief items. And I know that sounds quite simple, but in fact, getting to that area of Myanmar, it's already a country that is difficult to access, and then actually being able to get there in a timely way. And UNHCR has a commitment that when disaster breaks out, we will be anywhere in the world within 72 hours on the ground, ready to go. And in order to deliver on that commitment, particularly now at a time when governments are stepping back and there are challenges around funding and resourcing, that relationship that we have with our global partner, where, at a moment's notice, we can pick up that telephone and make it happen fast and have all of the preparedness in place to be able to act very quickly, that remains, that role of providing life-saving assistance at scale, at speed is incredibly important. And we couldn't do it without the increasing engagement of many of our private sector partners. As far as the longer term work goes, the second example that I wanted to talk about is we're working with a new initiative called Humanity Insured, which is a consortium of insurance, financial services companies that are working with UNHCR and a number of other UN agencies and international NGOs to provide financial solutions around climate change for those who are most impacted. So we worked with Humanity Insured to develop and deliver parametric insurance for a refugee camp in Malawi, which is at a very high risk of drought. And many of the people in the refugee camp are in farming and use agriculture as a means not only to feed themselves, but also to support themselves and earn a livelihood. And so building parametric insurance means the insurance payment will be triggered when certain conditions are met. In other words, certain temperatures are reached, certain levels of flooding are reached. And that payout, once that threshold is reached and disaster strikes, those households that are enrolled in the program receive an immediate payout. And that financial security really makes a massive difference. I think many of us think of insurance in our daily lives and how it provides us with a level of financial security that enables us to, when we're investing in a business, we can invest all of those funds rather than set some aside for when disaster strikes. So thinking about refugees and their very limited financial means, it makes an enormous difference for them to be able to have a financial safety net. And as part of that partnership, also delivering a wider package of kind of technical expertise and sort of financial advice and training to those communities so that year on year, that financial resilience can build up over time. And I think for us in building that partnership, the engagement with the community, the knowledge and understanding of local conditions, and exactly how the terms of that partnership and that assistance should be triggered, and how the payouts are made in a way that is secure and ensures that that it reaches those individuals directly and securely is incredibly important. So just to say that I 100% agree with the importance of local knowledge and how thinking of displaced people having insights and experiences that can really help us drive and design the policies that will protect them and enable them to build that financial and that climate resilience over the long term, and ensuring that they are better able to respond to the realities of displacement and of climate change at the same time, which is extremely challenging.
Thank you. That's great examples. It really brings it to life in terms of those partnerships on the ground. Margaret, coming to you. So there were obviously amazing examples that Emma's brought out, but also I know that there are several challenges that organisations face in effective partnerships: funding, communication, logistical challenges, and you're a very innovative and new model, and it would be great to hear kind of what strategies you're looking to, that you're finding effective to help overcome some of these challenges in terms of how we, tackle these humanitarian crises.
Thanks, Alexis. So I think that some of the contextual challenges, things like trust, differing languages, the funding environment, those contextual things are kind of always going to be the challenges and are going to have to be overcome as they come up. But I think there are some very easily addressed kind of structural barriers that would help incentivize and create a more enabling environment for corporate entities to engage with the public sector and with humanitarian actors, so that the great initiatives that Emma mentioned aren't just one-offs, so that there's a framework to allow for them to happen in more environments and really scale them and encourage a localized response. One of those structural barriers is high operational demands. So a significant amount of resources go towards staffing, logistics, compliant, which ultimately reduces the amount of money that can really reach frontline efforts. So the example that I have is, if you're looking for the best logistical minds in the world, you don't go to WFP or the UN, you go to UPS and DHL. And they might be able to share their expertise that would allow a secondment to a UN agency or to an NGO that would help make internal processes more efficient. But sometimes there's blanket rules that prevent those type of corporate secondments. And that means that logistics supply chains aren't, or administrative procedures aren't as efficient as they could be, which ultimately leads to more inefficient delivery of critical services. So one of the things we need to do is leverage corporate gifts in kind, services in kind, skilled volunteers in a better way, so that we're able to promote that efficiency amongst humanitarian actors. Another structural barrier is outdated regulations. Most grant frameworks treat private sector involvement like traditional government contracting, applying very rigid procurement standards that don't really reflect the changing corporate evolution that Clodagh was talking about, and allowing for things like low bono contributions. So let's say you're a tech company, let's say you're Monday.com or Automation Anywhere, and you want to provide digitalization of response activities or automation that would increase the impact of the humanitarian response, but you want to provide it at a fraction of the cost. So you want to give it as a low bono instead of a pro bono gift. The strict procurement rules don't allow for that type of offer to be recognized within the regulatory framework. And so because it doesn't align with traditional tendering procedures, despite the value it might be able to add, it's not creating this incentivized corporate environment for giving. So we really need to shift some policies that would enable those corporate incentives to contribute, and essentially modernizing the distinction between philanthropy and procurement that harnesses corporate goodwill in a more meaningful way. And the last example, and the last structural barrier I wanted to discuss, was limited private sector integration. So the private sector already is playing a big behind the scenes role in supplying goods, services, but there's no framework to involve them strategically or to recognize non-financial contributions. So similar to what Mabel McCune of Save the Children spoke about on the earlier panel, and the examples that Emma gave, there's a lot of very good public-private partnership examples, but they're kind of one-offs. They're not, or they're with one company. They don't bring together multi-industry, multi-stakeholders, and it doesn't cross all the boundaries. So PSHA is creating the digital platform and the connectivity to bring that in, so that if you're a pharmaceutical company and you want to give, pharmaceuticals at cost, that then we'll link it up with an end-to-end solution with a logistics company that will then put it in the hands of a local entity or a UN overseer to help reach that last mile delivery, creating a framework for multi-stakeholder partnerships. And kind of co-creating and co-designing these end-to-end solutions. But all of the barriers I've mentioned are also things that existed for a while now, and kind of are on the old system of humanitarian delivery. And so the interesting thing now is, with the humanitarian house being challenged and kind of rethought, since January, we now can look at how do we rebuild the architecture to be more inclusive, to be more towards localization. How do we create this same enabling environment for multinational companies, but also for local businesses? And, we're already seeing a shift in the response to local humanitarian actors and local companies. So how do we take these lessons that we've learned over the past 10 years and really shift them to enable those environments?
Thank you for that really insightful answer. We could talk all day, I'm sure, about these kind of things. You did touch upon this a little bit, and Clodagh, I'm going to come to you now to just talk about measurement. how we can measure the impact, because that's so important for companies to be able to justify why they're doing these things. So it would be great if you could just talk a little bit about transparency and impact, and why that's so important, and how companies are doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Alexis. You've set me up beautifully. So if you have Emma on one hand, who's the absolute knowledge guru in terms of what the on the ground needs are, and then you've got Margaret on the other hand, who is the excellent broker, and bringing the two parties together, what you then need to do is prove what you've actually done. And that's the measurement piece. And that's where B4SI has been operating for about 30 years. And I'm so pleased to hear you also mention social procurement, Margaret. So what we look at is we look at the community investment, which is that strategic shift from philanthropy, which includes gifts in kind and time, including cash, etc. We also look at procurement. So procurement of goods and services, either low bono or from social enterprises locally. And also we look at innovative developments in products and services that are explicitly for social good. And what we've seen over and over again is that when impact is measured, confidence in action increases. So, and this is especially true in disaster contexts where, stakes are high, decisions are fast, resources have to be justified. Companies tell us that their social investment budgets are increasingly under pressure, and we all know that administration changes in the US have changed the face of overseas aid, for instance. But while those internal pressures on budgets remain, and companies are always under pressure to show, no matter what they do internally, what has been the value of what we did. So we gave away 10 million. What happened for that? The 10 million doesn't matter. What matters is, what did we do? And then externally, we're seeing growing scrutiny from investors, civil society, and other players on how companies respond to crises. And let's face it, we're in a world of polycrises. So we've got conflict, we've got climate events, and then we've got displacements. So vague claims of doing good aren't good enough. They're not good enough internally within the business or externally. So with the shift then as well, with the ESG assurance and disclosures, it means that from an investor point of view, none of this cuts it. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to prove what you're saying you're doing. And how do you do that? Well, then you need to provide a structured, evidence-based articulation of what you have done that moves away from the inputs, which is just the money, and the outputs, which are what happened, into what changed. So what did you change? What did you change, not just in the immediacy, but also we talked about preparedness and we talked about resilience. So how is you as a private sector civil actor, how are you preparing for disaster in the future as well? And so measurement is no longer just about reporting, it's about strategic decision making and learning and trust building. And it's reflected in the depth of partnership. And Emma talked about that a little earlier in terms of the need for private sector actors to know and to reach grassroots levels with a trusted partner. And it's not a paternalistic piece, it's an expert partnership. And there's some great examples of that. So across our network, we have examples, for instance, of HSBC and Westpac, who both use their social impact data to align community investments with national priorities on financial inclusion and disaster resilience. We have the likes of Rolls-Royce and AstraZeneca, and they've shifted from grant making to capacity building. So they're supporting communities, for instance, with STEM education and health resilience in fragile geographies. Alexis, I'm going to call RELX out, and I know you didn't ask me to, but I must, because RELX models best practice by aligning SDG work with long-term partnerships in crisis-prone regions. And you focus both on the response and preparedness, and that is a massive move forward. And then just in terms of aligning it with strategy. So there's a brilliant example, for instance, one of our members, Nokia, who they don't make phones. They are into communications, and they ensured that, for instance, during the conflict in the Ukraine, that communications were in place to ensure schools could maintain learning and connectivity. And that plays right back into their central core philosophy. So they were immediately able to respond because it's a core strategy within their piece. I could go on, Alexis, with lots of.
I know we're nearly. I can't believe
running out of time.
Which is just, we could have talked all day, I'm sure. And thank you for all those amazing insights. And we are going to have to wrap up now, unfortunately. But I hope people have taken away some. I've taken away lots from this, and we've talked about the changes, the fast-moving changes in this area, and how climate change and conflict is really kind of putting pressure on communities around the world. And we've had some amazing examples from all of you about how companies are coming together with charities and NGOs, but a lot more to do. I'm sure this conversation will carry on, but thank you everybody so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. That was unbelievably, that went so fast, didn't it? We could do a whole day on this panel. Absolutely brilliant. Collaboration. Those are the key themes today. Thank you so much, Alexis. Really, really good to see you. And I'm sure I'll talk to you later. Well done. Really fascinating panel.
Thanks.